Hey guys, so today we're talking about cell communication. Now, this is a really important topic because a lot of what happens in our body is all due to different types of signaling pathways, which we'll get into. So, communication in a cell involves generation, transmission, and then reception of a signal. And a signal is just some sort of chemical compound that are generally a chemical molecule, but it can also include the direct detection of something like an environmental factor like light or sound or temperature. And all these pathways that are going to cause a change within an organism or within a cell are called signal transduction pathways. Now, signal transduction pathways are really important for continued life of an organism, and they've evolved from a common ancestor. And all organisms have signal transduction pathways, from our unicellular signaling pathways to our multicellular signaling pathways. And again, this is just going to involve the generation of chemical signals in response to either environmental variables or something that will support the functioning of an organism. All right. So let's talk about the different types of signals. We mentioned this a little bit when we were in our cell membranes unit, but I wanted to review it again. Now, autocrine signals are going to diffuse from one part of a cell to another. They're very close range types of signaling. We have our synaptic signals, which are involved in neurotransmitters in our nervous system. So these are chemicals released by one neuron and received by another over the synaptic space. We'll talk about that when we talk more about our nervous system. We have paracrine signals, which is our messages to nearby cells, and then endocrine signals, which can travel any distance throughout the organism, generally far distances, to get a chemical signal across the body of generally a multicellular organism. So hormones include things like insulin, things like our FSH and our LH, which are sex hormones. We'll talk more about that. And human growth hormone produced by the pituitary gland. All right, so let's go over a little bit of vocab before we move on. Now, signal transduction pathways always begin with reception. So what are they receiving? They're receiving a ligand, which is a specific chemical signal that's going to bind to a receptor. Now, if the receptor doesn't match, remember, these are specific signaling pathways. They have to fit, and it's got to be the appropriate shape for the receptor. And the receptor is the molecule in a cell membrane or in the cytoplasm of a target cell that's going to bind to the ligand. And then transduction begins. The binding of the signaling molecule changes the receptor protein in some way. So that particular change, that conformational change, is going to start our transduction pathway. So more about pathways. When a ligand interacts with the receptor protein, it's causing that conformational change to the receptor, resulting in the activation of a transduction pathway in the cell. So we have our ligand binding to our receptor and then causing this cascade of signals. Let's go over a few examples. We've already talked about G-protein linked receptors or G-protein coupled receptors in class in our example with the different phenotypic variations of the mouse and the mice fur. With this particular type of signaling, we have our signal molecule, which is our ligand, binding to the receptor, which is a membrane-embedded protein, and then activating our G protein here, or phosphorylation happens, which is our activation of our G protein, which is then going to phosphorylate the next protein, activate an enzyme, and then solicit this cellular response. We also have ligand-gated ion channels, which is going to have us have a ligand binding to a protein, again a transmembrane protein, and then which is another membrane receptor. Once the gate or the protein opens, these ions can flow through a cell membrane and move freely into a cell, which is going to change the concentration of ions in the cell and then trigger some sort of cellular response because there is a different concentration of ions inside or outside of the cell. Again, transduction is going to result or occur when we have reception of a signal and then our cellular response. So these responses can be multiple things. It can be things like changing of expression of a gene, and this is caused by environmental factors or caused by whatever ligands. It can change the activity of a protein, and it can change, of course, whether or not the cell dies at the right time or not. We have apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, and we'll see what happens with cancer when we actually do not see that programmed cell death at the appropriate times within the cell. Programmed cell death. Signaling pathways can be very, very complex. Most of them are going to involve multiple messengers or second messenger to get these different pathways going, and it can actually activate thousands of molecules. Now, we don't have to go and memorize all these different pathways for every single type of cell signaling that we want to look at, but we do need to know that these one ligand can cause a cascade of thousands of molecules and this amplified effect within a cell. So let's talk about second messengers. So these secondary messengers, we have our first messenger, which is the original signal molecule. That's our ligand. And then it will activate our receptor, which will then activate our other protein, which might activate an enzyme here. And then we will have our second messenger generated or turned on that can go activate another protein within the cell. So cyclic AMP is one of the examples of these. These are internal signaling molecules that are going to activate various catabolic metabolic pathways within the cell. Now you have to talk about alterations to cell signaling. Now this can cause problems within an organism. Generally, certain diseases are actually caused by improper cell signaling pathways. So diabetes, type 1 diabetes, is actually a failure to produce the insulin hormone in the body, and then we can't deal with glucose in the same way. Parkinson's syndrome is a neurological disease, and we have the neurons that normally produce our neurotransmitter dopamine. They're not working the same way anymore, and so we have a degeneration of our muscular system because there isn't any dopamine. Cancer is again a failure of cells to respond to the normal apoptosis pathway, and then we have this uncontrolled cell growth, which can lead to lots of health problems throughout the body for all the different types of cancers there are. Drugs as well can cause signaling pathways to act differently, such as antihistamines are going to block histamine signals and then decrease our inflammatory response within the body. And birth control, of course, is going to provide hormones that is going to block normal ovulation and then change the normal cycle of menstruation within a woman's body. So the four main things to remember are here. We're going to go deeper into cell signaling later on this year, but we need to remember about signal transduction pathways is that they are characterized by a signal, a transduction, and then a response. They are highly specific and highly regulated, and one signal molecule can cause a cascade effect, releasing thousands of molecules in a cell. And these pathways evolved from a common ancestor millions of years ago. All right, so that's it for our first video on cell communication. I will see you guys later.